many of the racial and social struggles that plague America today existed in a much more pronounced form in the year 1968. The increasingly unpopular Vietnam War was a quagmire with no end in sight. Over 16,000 American GIs were killed in action in 1968 alone. Most were not volunteers but draftees. The dead were overwhelmingly white and poor or working class. Today, it is difficult to imagine a war where hundreds of coffins would come back from far-off lands on a monthly basis. While Black Americans were being drafted into service, the rights of African Americans remained grievously limited in both the North and the South. The federal governments tried to step in with housing discrimination laws and the like, beginning a long debate about how far the government can and should go to mandate racial equality. I remember as a 7-year-old boy in 1968, a Maryland horse racing track where there were ropes set up to divide the white and colored sections, and this was 4 years after the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So the legislation that historians tend to focus on, like the 64 Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, were not totally implemented by the time of 1968. And it took many more years for it to be accepted by the citizenry throughout the nation. After the 1967 riots in Detroit and Newark and other places, support for the nonviolent civil rights strategy of Dr. Martin Luther King faded in both white and black communities. Faced with the increasingly confrontational and violent tactics of Stokely Carmichael and the Black Power movement, Dr. King began to alter his message. First, he announced his opposition to the continuation of the Vietnam War, an act that President Lyndon Johnson viewed as a betrayal. Secondly, King began to focus on economic inequality among the races, including poor pay, lack of union representation, and poor working conditions. This new focus on poverty, jobs, and equal pay brought him to Memphis, Tennessee, where garbage men were striking for better pay and working conditions. 2 men had recently been killed after being crushed by garbage compactors in garbage trucks. In February 1968, the garbage men in Memphis went on strike, and King joined the strikers on the 25th of March for a demonstration through downtown Memphis. However, the unruly crowd suddenly began smashing windows and looting, and King called off the march while the police in Memphis responded with billy clubs and tear gas. 1 demonstrator was killed, and martial law was imposed by the mayor of Memphis. Despite the violence of the previous march, King decided to return to Memphis in support of the garbage men. And when he returned, he checked into the Lorraine Motel on April 4th and was preparing to go to dinner when he stood on the balcony. A shot rang out from across the parking lot, and he was immediately struck in the throat and was killed almost on impact. Although the civil rights leader had been surveilled and wiretapped by the FBI for months, if not years, and although he had the protection of the Memphis police while he was there, they were too late getting to the scene to be able to determine where the assassin had shot from, or to be close enough to save King. Less than 2 months later, Senator Robert F. Kennedy was gunned down in a Los Angeles hotel kitchen. Kennedy was an anti-war candidate for the Democratic nomination for president that year, heavily aligned with African American interests, and he was murdered by a Jordanian citizen and Palestinian refugee named Sirhan, who was arrested at the scene. His funeral attendees filed out of St. Patrick's Cathedral on June 10th. The FBI had announced that Scotland Yard had discovered James Earl Ray, the suspect for the King murder, in London and had taken him into custody. Ray was a career criminal, an escaped convict with a third-grade education, yet somehow he managed to stay on the run for months and almost escaped to Rhodesia in Africa. Ray confessed to the crime, and yet he always insisted that he had the help of a Confederate named Raoul, who supplied him with cash and guidance. As an ex-convict on the run, Ray's ability to fund his travels, which were wide-ranging, has never been adequately explained. In 1993, declassified documents revealed that Army military intelligence was surveilling Dr. King as well in Memphis and elsewhere. Reporter Stephen Tompkins revealed, quote, on April 3rd, King returned to Memphis while Army agents from the 111th Military Intelligence Group shadowed his movements and monitored radio traffic from a sedan crammed with electronic equipment. 8 Green Beret soldiers from Operation Detachment Alpha 184 team were also in Memphis carrying out an unknown mission. Such A teams usually contain 12 members. On October 4th, at 6:01 p.m., a bullet from a .30-06 rifle equipped with a scope struck King down on the balcony of the Lorraine Hotel. End quote. Perhaps one day, historians may finally understand the significance of the military intelligence contingent operation surrounding King and whether it had any role at all in the murder. It's clear, however, that the atmosphere in the nation and among the nation's elites in early 1968 was increasingly violent and riven with social and racial strife. While King faced countless assassination plots from the time of the Montgomery bus boycott in the 1950s, the refocus of his activities to opposing the Vietnam War and demanding economic rights for African Americans through his Poor People's March on Washington, D.C., clearly set off alarms in the Lyndon Johnson White House and in the military and intelligence apparatus. Perhaps someday we'll know the true extent of what that military intelligence contingent was doing there, and it's an important area of research for future historians. Thank you.